Footsteps in the dark, a cry in the night, the wind in the trees, and the beating of a heart all lead to Claude Chabot's Theater of the Fantastic, where the strange meets the disturbing. We join a train traveler on the way to some much-needed rest and quiet, who will only encounter some disquiet.
It's amazing that you can find such peace only a half hour from New York. I'd forgotten. After a mad dash from work, where I put my cases in order, going over with Dawson the details of the estates that I had newly organized, I took my pay in cash and left at 3:30, spared the sultriness of the subway when I was given Dawson's car for a ride home. The driver waited while I packed and changed, and then it was off to the 610. We arrived at Pennsylvania Station, picked up my reservation at the ticket window, then made a breathless and hobbling run for the train. For all the last-minute rush, the train is blissfully empty for a Friday evening, and I have a car practically all to myself. I finished my cream pie and a last cup of coffee in a dining car, limped back to my seat, enjoyed a cigarette before dozing off, and I thought of Dawson and his kindness to me. Did you say a full month in the country?
Naturally, Stephen. Your leg won't heal any quicker, whether in the city, suburb, or a hamlet in Vermont. And where would you rather be in August? Gasping for a breath of air in your pied-à-terre in the village with the smells and the noise, or staring at the landscaping in that benighted suburban graveyard where you were raised? Outside of Princeton, isn't it? All horsey and proper. Even if it's only a minor fracture and you can hide your cast beneath your suit, you'll have the office in an uproar, thumping up and down the hallways with those crutches of yours.
The hallways, as you well know, are well carpeted. You'll never know that I'm around. And my cast is very hospitable. Everyone signed it. And look, Patty's drawn a little caricature of you just for the fun of it.
Where?
Just above my ankle.
Is my nose really that big? Well, my boy, the war's over. And it's time to have a little fun. You haven't had much of that in your life, I gather. Just out of law school, then 2 years of service at the North African front, trading quips with Rommel, then back here to make your mark in our little firm. Mind you, it's a good place for you. I see your name up there with the partners in, say, 10 years. So why not relax? Shake the war's dust from your soul. Take a month. I heartily endorse the plan. I'll clear it with the partners. Maybe you'll meet a girl, some rosy-cheeked cow maiden you can dazzle with your urban ways.
I can't easily get to the corner on this lake. I don't know how I'm going to get to Vermont.
It's but a few hours by train to Burlington and a 20-minute ride by taxi amongst the cow flops and the dairy farms to the Gables. Then, when you're there, the gardener can run you around wherever you need to go. I was up there just last spring. The place is a bit dusty, but I can call beforehand and have the house open for you. It was my wife's family place, you know. We're going abroad this year, and it's free. Called the Gables because, well, it has so very many of them. Marvelous view of the mountains, and the air will be sweet with newly mown hay. Of course, I'll have to give the cook a ring. We had to find a new one, and I can never remember her name. I'll have to ask Emma to ring her. We don't want to send you up there and have you starve to death, do we? I'll have Patty make all the other arrangements. Mind you, the place is 5 miles or so from the main road, and there's no electricity except for the kitchen. Had it completely modernized back in '36, but Emma wanted to keep that old New England feeling, so we didn't electrify the whole house. No telephone either, I'm afraid. I must say we've got to remedy that soon. Come to think of it, maybe it's not such a grand idea. I'm offering it to you as it is, sight unseen, but perhaps you'll feel isolated. With your leg in that condition, perhaps it really is not such a good idea.
Nonsense. There's nothing I like better than an old homestead far from the madding crowds and lurid electric lights. to say nothing of leaving New York behind in August. I've been known to make a sandwich or boil an egg in distress. I take the Gables sight unseen.
Very well. I like that attitude. Now I'll ring for Patty. She'll fix everything for you, my boy. Patty? Patty! Infernal thing. Patty!
When I arrived, there was a cab ready to meet me. We made our way from the quaint downtown of Burlington out into the lush farm countryside. The windows of the car were rolled down, and the cool air was heavy with the perfume of grass, earth, and honeysuckle. We turned onto a dirt road from the state highway. I wondered how the driver made out the almost invisible road, not much larger than a cow path. We traveled uphill through the dense woods for a few miles, when the driver turned again and, going another 2 or 3, eventually came to a clearing. That was when I first saw the Gables. The rambling building lay as if sleeping, some of its many crenellations visibly outlined in black against the starry, moonless sky. The car slowly made its way up to the house, jostling my cast as the suspension responded to the deep ruts in the old driveway. We stopped. As the driver helped me out, I saw that the front yard was quite overgrown, my feet sinking deep into the tall grass. The headlights cut twin swaths of light across the derelict lawn and illuminated a section of wooden balustrade of the front porch. Somewhere behind me, I heard a rustling. I felt a surprising sense of relaxation with the cool, sweet air, the isolation, and the immense dome of night perforated with pinpricks of diamond light. I found and unlocked the side door, which fortunately opened into the kitchen, where I flipped on its oasis of electric light. I hailed the driver from the bright interior to bring in my bags. The low-ceilinged room was scrubbed and spotless. Someone had been in to clean, as there was a mop still standing moist in a bucket of wash water. The driver nodded courteously when I paid him, and he and his cab disappeared. Dawson was to be congratulated when I got back, I told myself. He's made every part of the journey painless. I tore open a note that lay on the kitchen table, simply addressed, "Guest." It informed me that tomorrow the garden would be tidied and food brought from town. The light from the kitchen illuminated part of the small dining room and cast some light to the front of the house. I found a candle on a sideboard in the dining room, and lighting it, proceeded to explore the ancient structure. It really was a charming old place, furnished with antiques and practically reeking of its colonial past. Then I wearily made my way up the narrow staircase, hauling my valise and crutches with me, not without difficulty. I hobbled into the master bedroom, set my bag down, and threw the huge casement window wide open. The uneven, bubble-filled panes in the weathered leaded sash were probably as old as the house itself. In the distance, the blue-black outline of the mountains was silhouetted against the iridescent sky. Cool, moist air crept into the room, and I collapsed into the comfortable nest of the four-poster, tired of carrying my heavy frame around with one leg and crutches, and helplessly fell into a voluptuous sleep. I awoke some time later, startled by some noises. Somewhat surprised by my strange surroundings, I struggled to force myself awake, remembered where I was, sat up in bed, and listened. I was reassured by the simple chirping of crickets. The sounds that awakened me were gone, so I shrugged them off as part of a silly dream. Swinging my body off the bed and steadying myself, I awkwardly tore off my shoes and clothes, staggered across the room to snuff the candle out, and then went back to pull the bedclothes down and collapsed into them. I was drowsy and eager to get back to sleep, though I was still a little puzzled about what I had heard. I listened again as I lay there with my eyes closed, but the house maintained a sepulchral stillness. The raucous chirping of birds awakened me the next morning, as much as the cheerful sun flooding the room through the chintz curtains. Emma had such a gracious touch. It was certainly far from my flat and the grubby shades I use for privacy. Rousing myself, I staggered over to the window, stretched, yawned, and rubbing my eyes, brushed aside the curtains to take a look at the day. The house had an even finer view of the valley and mountains than I thought, perched, as it was, on the gently sloping hillside. The air was sweet with newly mown hay, and the morning looked brightly promising. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was well past 7 o'clock. I planned on getting a lift into town when the supplies arrived to call some college buddies who still lived near Dartmouth. In a half hour, I was bathed, one leg out of the tub, shaved, groomed, and comfortable in a pair of old Bermudas, white polo shirt, and loafers. Then I heard the clatter of pots and pans from downstairs. I could smell bacon frying and coffee percolating. It was probably the person who was supposed to bring the groceries, I thought, although it seemed much too early for anyone to be at the house yet or to be here unannounced. I was suddenly uneasy. I thought I heard music. A phonograph? I quickly gave myself a mental slap on the wrist, thinking like this was absurd and not worthy of me. Standing up, reassured by my athletic build, I opened the door where I paused. Yes, the noises were real. I called out, "Who's there?" surprised at the timidity in my voice. No one answered. I started to go downstairs, following the curving U of the stairwell without wavering until I reached the bottom. There was a chill dampness in the air. I was suddenly irrationally afraid and had the urge to run anywhere as fast as I could. My heart beat so spastically that I thought it would explode. "Who's there?" I demanded, stealing around the corner into the dining room. What I saw riveted my attention as I approached the table. A plate was laid for breakfast, with crisp fried bacon, 2 fried eggs, biscuits, a chunk of country butter, and beside the plate was a glass of orange juice and a cup of coffee with a tiny creamer. The steam from the coffee undulated lazily under me. I felt silly, afraid of this fine breakfast.
Just squeezed that juice myself.
Are you the cook here?
Isn't the music lovely?
A nearby window, overgrown with ivy, cast a faint green light on her. She was a somewhat plump, dark-haired woman of maybe 40 years, with pale, smooth skin and startling black eyes which focused somewhere beyond me. She stared as if looking through me. It occurred to me that she might be blind.
I've cooked many a meal here. Like I said, squeezed that juice myself and made those biscuits. Baking powder biscuits. I just had to make them again. Go on, try one. They're still warm. Try one with lots of butter. They're very light. You can't use too much butter. Sit down and enjoy your breakfast.
Yes, I will. Where's that music coming from? I'm a guest of the Reeds. I work for Dawson Reed. I'm Steve Dalton, I volunteered as I approached within a few feet of her.
Miss Blackburn, Mr. Dalton. Now enjoy your breakfast.
She quickly turned and retreated into the kitchen. A bit odd, I thought, especially with that fixed stare. It was possible she was blind, but might know the layout of this house so well that she could move around without accident. It'd be typical of Dawson to forget to tell me this. I sat down, and forgetting my puzzlement, I did enjoy the breakfast. Everything was prepared perfectly, and the biscuits, like nothing I had ever tasted. "I could use some more of those biscuits," I shouted as I finished the last one, sopping up egg yolk. There was no answer. I got up to take a peek into the kitchen where everything was in order. In fact, the stove was cold, and no pots or pans were out drying. The dish towel was stiff and dry. Perhaps she had brought the food cooked from elsewhere. That didn't seem likely. As I walked back to the table, I saw her again, this time facing away from me, going towards the front door. I didn't notice her cross the dining room. She must have left the other side of the kitchen through the pantry just as I entered it.
I hope you've enjoyed your breakfast, Mr. Dalton.
Yes, and those biscuits. I wondered, are there any more?
I just had to make those biscuits one last time.
My attention wandered to the table, and I noticed that there were more on my plate and a fresh cup of coffee. When I looked up, she was nowhere to be seen. "Miss Blackburn! Miss Blackburn!" I went over to the front door, opened it, and looked out. "Miss Blackburn!" I shouted to the hills as I wandered outside through the tall grass. I could see where the car and the driver and my own footsteps had crushed the tall grass the previous night, but there was no sign of Miss Blackburn, her car, nor any indication that she had left this way. I went back inside to enjoy the rest of my breakfast, but felt a little out of sorts. Afterwards, I had a cigarette on the front porch and took some time exploring the overgrown front yard. After a long while, an old roadster appeared out of the woods and bounced up the gravel driveway. A woman with hair dyed a violent red clambered out of it.
Yoo-hoo, Mr. Dalton! It is Mr. Dalton, isn't it? I've brought you some groceries. I bet you're famished for breakfast by now.
Well, the cook has already fixed me a fine breakfast.
The cook? But, Mr. Dalton, I'm Mrs. Childs, the cook and housekeeper. I was up here yesterday and left you that note. There isn't anyone else besides me and the gardener, and he won't be up till later.
But I've told you, I've already had breakfast prepared for me by Miss Blackburn.
Is this a joke, Mr. Dalton, between Mr. Reed and yourself? To make fun of the new housekeeper? Because if it is, it's a tasteless and cruel one.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not making you or anyone else the butt of a joke. Miss Blackburn was here this morning and prepared breakfast.
You aren't joking, are you, Mr. Dalton? Did she make you biscuits?
Well, yes, but what does that have to do with anything?
The Reeds were so upset by what happened that they went straight back to New York after the final arrangements.
You're making no sense, ma'am. What arrangements?
On the state highway. They don't know who caused it, but the truck driver and Miss Blackburn were...
Were what?
Killed. They were killed. They think the truck went out of control and hit her, but no one is really sure what went wrong. She had gone into town one day last spring to pick up some baking powder. That's what the grocer told the police afterwards. How peeved she said that she had to go into town just for that one little thing.
I watched poor Mrs. Childs as she searched my face for a denial of what I had told her, as I searched hers for the same thing. But remembering the unfocused gaze, I realized that those blank, staring eyes of Miss Blackburn had been the eyes of a corpse. I recalled the distant, dreamy voice and her last words to me.
I just had to make those biscuits one last time.
Our cast has included John Knox as Steve Dalton, Roger Parsons as Dawson Reed, Dee Dee Charney as Miss Blackburn, and Judith Boxley as Mrs. Childs. Claude Chabot's Theater of the Fantastic was written, produced, and directed by Peter Pagano.